Coming up on today's episode of the Calimesa Insider, we sit down with someone who has deep roots in this community and a lifetime of public service behind him, Councilmember Eric Cundieff. We'll talk about what it was like growing up in the Yucaipa Calimesa area, long before Calimesa became the city we know today. He'll share what led him to enlist in the U.S. Navy, some of the unforgettable moments from his time at sea, and how those experiences shaped his approach to leadership and service. We'll also dive into his years as a deputy sheriff, how he found his way onto the Planning Commission, and what ultimately inspired him to run for city council. It's a conversation about hometown roots, public service, and the unexpected journey that brought him to the dais. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Calimesa Insider Podcast, the official podcast of the city of Calimesa. Join City Manager Will Kolbow as he takes you behind the scenes of city projects, community stories, and the future of our hometown. Stay informed, stay connected. This is the Calimesa Insider Podcast.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to this special episode of the Calimesa Insider Podcast. I hope you enjoyed your Thanksgiving. And as we begin to get into the holiday shopping season, I want to remind you to shop local. Gift cards from our local restaurants and shops make excellent gifts, and we have plenty to choose from. Remember, every dollar spent in Calimesa goes towards helping our local economy and providing tax dollars for the services that you count on each day. Now, before we get into today's guest, I want to start with a quick preview of some of the important events coming up for our community, as well as a personal note. This Monday, December 1st at 6 p.m., the City Council will be holding its regular meeting at the Norton Young Love Senior Center. This particular meeting falls on a meaningful date. December 1st marks Calimesa's 35th birthday as an incorporated city. And to celebrate that milestone, we'll be hosting a community reception immediately following the meeting, and we'd love to have residents join us for that. And I'll just say this, our 35th birthday might not be the only historic moment happening that evening. This meeting could go down in Calimesa's history for another reason as well, and we'll get into that a little later in the episode with our guest. If you can't attend in person, you can always watch the meeting live or on demand at calimesa.gov/YouTube. The full agenda packet with all staff reports and attachments can be found at calimesa.gov/agenda center or by just clicking the Agenda and Minutes button on our webpage, on our website's homepage. Join us Saturday, December 6th for the Calimesa Chamber of Commerce's Get Your Lights On Christmas Parade. The parade will take place on Calimesa Boulevard between Avenue K and Myrtlewood, beginning at 5 p.m. The city will also be hosting a Christmas market that day from 3 p.m. to 8 p.m. at 1103 Calimesa Boulevard along the parade route. For the next episode of the podcast, I'll be hosting a virtual town hall to give an update on the Cherry Valley Boulevard interchange. You will also be able to join online to ask questions about the project. It's tentatively scheduled for December 11th at 6 p.m. So watch both the podcast and city's social media channels for additional details, and we will provide those soon. Finally, on a personal note, the day this episode is posting also marks my 3-year anniversary with the city of Calimesa. I'm not usually one to make things about me, but I do want to say this. These 3 years have absolutely flown by. A lot has happened in that time, and I'm grateful every day for the support of this community, the city council, and for the incredible staff who work so hard behind the scenes. It's been an honor to serve alongside all of you. Now, for today's episode, I'm excited to sit down with Councilmember Eric Cundieff. Many of you know him from his work on the City Council, and before that, his time on the Planning Commission. But today, we're going to go deeper, not into policy or politics, but into his story. We'll talk about his early years growing up right here in the Yucaipa Calimesa area, his service in the U.S. Navy, his career as a deputy sheriff in San Bernardino County, and ultimately what drew him into public service at the local level. He also has some great Navy stories, some probably that we can't share on here, but we're going to go get into at least one of those on here too. So Councilmember Cundieff, thanks so much for being on the program today.
Thank you, Will, and congratulations on that 3-year mark. That's fantastic.
Thank you. So let's start at the beginning. You grew up in Yucaipa Calimesa communities. What are some of your earliest memories of the area, and what was it like growing up here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we moved to Yucaipa in 1987. and we were living in Yosemite area, a little town called Mariposa. And so that would have put me in the 7th grade. And at that time, both Calimesa and Yucaipa were very small towns, lots of orange groves, lots of egg ranches, and it was more considered retirement communities. You know, they were just kind of small, and you could go to bed at night, leave your door unlocked. You didn't really have to worry about much. Everybody kind of knew everybody, and it was a good place to grow up. Fantastic area to grow up in, absolutely.
So when you look back at the community you grew up in, and then you look at Calimesa today, what stands out to you? What feels the same and what feels different?
So, interestingly enough, as much as both cities have grown, I still feel that there's a sense of small town heart in both cities. Calimesa, for the numbers that have grown from 1987 until where we're at now, we're at roughly 12,000 people. I'm so surprised at how we still hold on to that small town feel, you know, and it's a nice feeling to have those open spaces that everyone cherishes, and to be able to grow, but yet still have that comfortability. You know, that's, I think, the most impressive thing about our city.
Okay. Every community has those defining people or moments that shape who we become. For you, who were some of the early influences or even experiences that helped develop your sense of service or responsibility to the community?
Wow. So I was blessed by my mom and dad they were married the whole time until he passed away. And a lot of my early memories of responsibility and self-worth really came from my dad. He was a hardworking blue-collar guy. He was a janitor for Yucaipa Calimesa School District. Was the head custodian for a while back in the late 80s and into the early 90s. And he always taught me to work hard. And so when I was a young kid, if I wanted money, you know, to buy whatever it was, you know, paper routes weren't really a big thing for us, but cutting yards and going and pulling weeds or helping wherever you could. And so that instilled in me a work ethic. Work hard for what you want. Don't expect anybody to give it to you. Go out there and earn it. And so that was something that I don't think you could put any kind of value to that. That was just fantastic. And then the idea of serving others, I think, came along with that, because you're doing this work to help somebody. In most cases, they're seniors or elderly people that can't go out and do the work themselves. And so there was a sense of, you know, almost you're a little proud, you know, that you did something, you got paid, but you also made these families feel good that you're helping, you know. And so I really liked that.
And looking back, was there ever a moment from your childhood or teenage years in hindsight where you can say, yeah, that might have been the first clue I'd end up in public service someday?
Yeah, so there was a situation. I was younger. It was probably 4th, 5th grade, I think. And I had a friend, and I think it was probably 4th grade. We were living in Indio before we moved up to Northern California. And we had gone to the local Kmart. And we only had maybe $4 or $5 to spend at that point, you know. And we'd gone in, and there were some items that we both wanted, but we couldn't really afford to pay for. And unbeknownst to me, my friend had decided to steal those items. And I didn't know. I had no idea. I just knew that when we had left the store, we got stopped by a couple of security guys or their loss prevention folks, you know, assuming that's who they were. And they went through my stuff, and of course I had whatever it was I paid for, whatever Matchbox car it was, I think. And he had stolen, you know, a couple different items. And I remember how that felt. And to me, it was almost a gut punch, you know, like embarrassment, because I wouldn't do that, you know, but here I was with somebody that was doing that. And it was at that moment, I think, that there was a straight contrast between what was right and what was wrong. And I really remember enjoying being on the side of right, the side that was doing the right thing by just paying for what it was that you wanted, not being a thief. And then the outcome was the kid's parents had to come pick him up because they detained him, you know, and they had to take pictures of him, and he wasn't welcome in the store anymore, you know. And while that didn't happen to me, you know, I just remembered that experience, and I thought, man, I would never want that. You know, I want to be on the right side of things.
Right, right. So I want to fast forward a bit to your decision to join the U.S. Navy.
Yeah.
What motivated that choice for you, and what was it something you always knew you wanted to do, or is it something, or did someone or something push you in that direction?
So I never wanted to be a military guy. Never had any aspirations to join the Army or Navy or anything. I kind of grew up without really any direction as far as what I wanted to do after high school. Not so much because my folks weren't pushing me. There wasn't anything I felt that I was being called to, right? And so how I came to that decision to go in the military was after high school. I was installing garage doors for Lloyd Copeland Garage Doors, still in Yucaipa. Great family, known them for years. And I was weekend hanging out with some friends, and I remember sitting out on the porch talking with one of my buddies, and I said, "Man, we can't keep doing this. You know, I'm in manual labor construction, and I'm young, and he was kind of working at one of the fast food restaurants, and I said, we got to figure something out, man. What are we doing here?" And he said, "You know, we should go in the military." So it was his idea. My buddy Eric, it was his idea. He came up with this, and I said, "Man, I know some guys in the Army, and I don't really want to go in the Army, and I know some guys in the Marines, and I don't really want to do that. And I know a guy in the Air Force, and I didn't really care for that guy. You know, he was kind of a jerk." And so he says, "Well, my uncle was in the Navy. He was a corpsman, which is a medic." I says, "The Navy?" He says, "Yeah, he loved it, man. He traveled around the world. He got to see all these great places, and, you know, got to experience all these great things and served the country. And plus he got a, GI Bill out of it and all these great things that come with it." And so I think it was probably that next Monday or so, I think we went down to the Navy recruiter's office. Both he and I, we didn't tell our folks, we just did it. We went down, I think I was 18, and went down and told them, "Hey, we want to join." And that's really where the idea had come from, to get into the military.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for those watching, including myself, who haven't served, what did a typical day in the Navy look like for you, and what did your role involved?
So once you're done with boot camp, and that's pretty standard, right? I think the Army and the Marine boot camps are probably a little more intense than the Navy boot camp. I'll concede that to all those Navy and Marine and Army guys out there. Theirs is tougher. Air Force, I don't think is, but that's just my opinion. So you get through boot camp, and it's a stress, a whole lot of stress you go through, and learning and lack of sleep and everything. And they want to make sure that you're going to be able to work in that branch, whatever your job is. They want to be able to make sure that you're going to be successful and be a contributing member to that branch, right? Mm-hmm. So once you get through that, you report to your duty station. In my case, it was a pre-commissioned ship, the Fitzgerald, USS Fitzgerald, DDG 62. And so what that meant was the ship was being built in Bath, Maine, and we would go and report to a unit there in 32nd Street, San Diego. And every day we'd go in, do muster, take roll call, these kind of things, and then we would go train. We would just train all day. Different classes, different skills, firefighting, shipboard firefighting, helo crash and smash, meaning that we would have helicopters land on our flight deck. So we would have to learn how to fuel those, learn how to combat a crash if that happened, or a fire. So it was nonstop training, nonstop. Additional culinary background, because that's what I went in for, was culinary. Mm-hmm. I wanted to open a restaurant, and I figured the best way to do it was get in the military and have them, teach me some stuff, and then go to culinary school and all that,
Right.
And so, yeah, it was just a lot of training. And then once you get on the ship, a day that consists of, there's a lot of folks that are standing watch outside of their class, so they may be a radioman, but there's watches that are stood throughout the day. So they'll have to go to different watch station, whether it's on the bridge or whether it's in the engine room or wherever it may be. They have so many hours they serve, and then they have free time to go rest or exercise or do whatever before they have to go back to their normal job. Mm-hmm. I was a little different. I didn't have that because I worked 12-hour days. I'd get up in the morning early, and then I'd work all day. And then at the end of the day, which would probably be around 10 o'clock at night, then we would clean the kitchen down, and then the night crew would come in, and then the next day we'd have off. You know?
Okay.
So because we worked so many hours straight doing these kind of things for the ship, you know,
Right.
so it was like a hybrid kind of a thing.
Okay.
But it was good. And then when I left there and went to D.C. To work at the White House under President Clinton, that was a whole nother experience. That every day was different. You know, one week you may be working in the dining room, so you'd go in early in the morning, 4:30 in the morning, and you know, you'd start prep and all kinds of things. You know, to if you're working in the kitchen, you know, get culinary stuff ready. If you're in the dining room, you're serving, you're cleaning up everything, making sure everything's ready for whatever guests are coming in that day. Because a lot of people don't know this. There's a couple of dining rooms in the West Wing, and the Navy mess, as it's called, is the primary kitchen for the West Wing. So whenever the president, vice president, all the staff is there, that's where they can order from. It's safe for them to eat there, obviously, and
Right.
and they don't have to go off, you know, premise to get that kind of stuff. So. So it was a really different experience other than some of the folks that served in other places. You know,
Yeah.
every day was a little different.
Well, and speaking of which, you know, I've talked a lot about some of the stories. You've shared some of those, and I did promise our viewers, you know, at least that you'd share at least the story for. So, can you share some, you know, family-friendly and safe for the podcast stories for us?
Absolutely. There's a couple that I'd like to share. One deals with travel with the president. So that was the other thing. We were really food service security officers. We were also chefs. We were also butlers. We just did a lot of different things. But one of the trips that I took with the president was to Pakistan, President Clinton. And they went to the presidential palace in Pakistan. And I remember getting out there with Secret Service about probably 5 to 7 days before, you know, president showed up. And that's necessary so they can do all their walkthroughs and handle their security aspect. And for our end, we really didn't have a whole lot to do until it was actually game day, right, when he shows up and the food's being prepared.
Right.
So we wouldn't necessarily go and prepare the food in those situations, but more be observers to make sure that everything that was being prepared was being done proper, that would not be poisoned or cause the president to be sick or something, you know, along those lines. In this particular situation, being that we're Westerners, we have a certain way of eating versus folks from different parts of the world, right? We have holding temperatures, we drink different types of water, you know, and it's not a slam to those folks, it's just that our systems have just adjusted differently.
Right.
So I got in early that morning. They were preparing this big feast, and President Clinton was coming in. I think he'd got there the day before, and they were going to have this big luncheon and kitchen. I was in there at like 7 in the morning, and these guys are preparing, you know, fish and lamb and different types of dishes. And I'm watching these guys, all these chefs from Pakistan, you know, and they're cooking this stuff up, and they're plating it, and they're putting it on trays, and they're leaving it out in the open. They didn't have like holding boxes or anything for it. Mm-hmm. And a holding box would be something to maintain the temperature so bacteria doesn't, you know, grow and create toxins and cause you to be ill when you eat it.
Right.
You know? And so I was watching this, and I'm looking, and I was traveling with the chief petty officer. I was an E4 at the time, so I was a third-class petty officer. And I was traveling with the chief petty officer, and I went to the chief, and I said, Chief, I said, we got a problem. You know, some of this food's been sitting out for 3, 4, 5 hours now. Boss ain't eating until like 1:30, 2 o'clock. This is going to be bad, you know. And he said, well, we got to let the doc know. And at the time was Navy, she's an admiral or retired as an admiral, Connie Tramontano, I believe her last name. She was a wonderful person to work with. And he says, you got to let her know. Got to let her know. I said, okay. And so I let her know. And so she told me, she says, well, let Doug know, which was the president's, I don't want to say handler, but he was his aide, you know, kept a schedule, and hey, we got to do this, we got to do that kind of thing.
Right.
So, and I knew Doug fairly well, and I went to Doug, and I said, Doug, boss can't eat this food. He says, what? He says, we got problems with the holding temps, everything's been set out, they're going to reheat and then serve, and if he eats this, he's going to get sick. And he's like, oh, okay. And that was about all I got out of him. And I thought, okay, I did my job.
Right.
And then we go to the briefing before he goes in for this luncheon and, you know, politicking and everything that he does, you know. And so I'm standing there, and both Doc knew and Doug knew, and he's going around the room, and he's talking to, you know, John Podesta and Madeleine Albright. They all came along this trip, and he said, hey, you know, talking what he does, and he says, does anybody have anything else, And at this point, I'm looking over at Doug, and I'm looking at Doug, and Doug's not paying attention to nothing, right? I looked over at Doc, and she was doing her thing, and I said, sir, I have something, because neither one of them were saying anything, and I thought, I can't let the president eat this food and get foodborne illness, man. I just can't do it. I said, sir, I have something. And he stops, and he looks over, and he goes, well, who are you? I said, sir, I'm Petty Officer Cundieff. I'm your food service lieutenant, on this trip. And he said, well, what's the problem, I said, well, sir, I've been here since 7 a.m., and here's the issue with the holding temperatures and the food that's been prepared. And he says, it's our recommendation that you don't eat this food, because if you do, you're gonna be violently ill. And he stopped for a second, as President Clinton often did when he's talking to folks, for those of us that remember him anyways. Well, what the hell am I supposed to do now, he says. And I thought, here I got the leader of the free world, he's kind of perturbed. And I'd said to him, I said, well, Mr. President, I said, we're gonna have food in your holding room for you. We'll make sandwiches for you, because we bring all that stuff along, drinks, all that stuff. And, well, what do I do with the plate? I said, okay, sir, there's certain things that you can eat, such as the rice, and the vegetable, because there was no protein in it. And take your fork and mash some of that food around, and then lay your napkin over that. You can eat the bread and anything else you can peel. And the consomme, I think they made last minute, there was a vegetable consomme, you can eat that. And I says, and then that way you're not, insulting these folks or whatever, and you're able to make it look like you ate, you're just not eating a lot, and
right.
And so that's what happened. And so, what was interesting about that story was that the president listened, obviously, because then he turns to Connie Tramontano, the doctor, and he says, is this true? And she says, absolutely is true. You're going to get sick if you eat that food. So there was some folks there that didn't pay attention to what we had told them, and they ate the food anyways. And they were just sick, just vomiting and everything else you could, imagine.
Well, did the president recognize that and go, well, thank you for...
No, he didn't. He was very good at recognizing the female members of our staff quite frequently, but not to the male ones. And that's all I'll say about that.
Okay, understood.
But there is one more story about the time there that I wanted to share, and I think I was kind of telling you a little bit about it, and it was a story with Garth Brooks. Mm-hmm. And why I want to share this story was because oftentimes people like that, you think they're on a totally different plane, and that they just don't have human emotion like we do, right? We're normal people.
Right.
And I remember there was an event on the White House South Lawn. It was a VH1 Save the Music Foundation. I think it was probably in 2000, 99, somewhere around there. And all these great artists were there: Lenny Kravitz, B.B. King, Eric Clapton, John Fogerty, NSYNC when they were somebody, they were there, and Garth Brooks. And the young lady who I was closing with that night in the dining room was a huge Garth Brooks fan, and her name was Sarah, and she was a wonderful person to work with, and she knew that Garth Brooks was going to be over there. And she wanted to go over to the South Lawn, and because of our position at the White House, we had access to just about everywhere. We had a certain lapel pin that allowed Secret Service to recognize that we had access to go wherever. Mm-hmm. So we went over to the South Lawn and watched some of these acts, perform for the next day they were going to have the show. And as we were standing there talking, she looks up and she just vapor locks, man. She just absolutely, and I look at her and I say, Sarah, and then I see where she's focused at, and it was Garth Brooks.
I could understand the reaction.
Oh,
yeah.
She was just, and you could understand it. Well, so could he, because apparently he looked over and he saw that, and he walked right over to us. And so he comes over to us, and he sticks his hand out, and he says, hi, I'm Garth Brooks, And I says, I know. I says, hi, I'm Eric Cundieff. I'm one of the president's cooks. And he looks at Sarah, and he sticks his hand out to shake her hand, and she grabs his hand, and he says, I'm Garth Brooks. And she said nothing. It was just like you could hear a pin drop. She was just vapor locked. And eventually, when she could say something, she said her name. And then she went into oh my God, I love you. You're the most important artist in my life of all time. I have all your bootlegs. I have this, I have that. And she's going off all this stuff. And he says, I didn't know that stuff existed, you know. And so she's telling him, yeah, I have all this from when you did the show in Nashville, when you did this in Texas, when you did this. And so he was being really gracious and cool with it, right?
Yeah.
So then he turns to me, which I wasn't expecting because she was the fan. You know, I was not really a country guy at that point.
Right, yeah.
I liked old country, but he turns to me and says, well, what about you? You a country fan? I said, no. You know, so I said, no, not really. But he did a rendition of Kiss's Hard Luck Woman, I believe it was. There was a tribute album to Kiss.
Yeah.
And he did a really great job. And so I complimented on that. And I said, man, that rendition you did was fantastic. That was a really, really nice thing you did. And then it was okay and everybody was good. But the most impressive part of it was she tells him that her roommate, Jill, was just as big a fan as her, if not more. And cell phones were relatively new at this point.
Right.
But because of where we were, we had access. And so he offers to call the roommate.
Wow.
At the house. And so gets the cell phone, dials it up, and waiting for Jill to answer, and Jill never answers. The answering machine picks up.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so he leaves her a message. He's like, Jill, this is Garth Brooks. I'm at the White House with Jill and Eric, and you know, I heard you're a big fan, and I just wanted to tell you thank you. And so I share that story because it just showed a human side of people, you know, that tend to be in the spotlight, you know, that
we idolize.
Yeah, and he was just very kind and very gracious, and I just always respected him for that.
Nice.
Yeah, it was a good story. Yeah.
That's cool. So after your service in the Navy, you went into a career in law enforcement as a deputy sheriff with San Bernardino County.
Yeah.
And so what drew you to that field?
So in the Navy, cooks, they don't spend a lot of money to train us. You know, be honest, you know, we're not normally all the sharp guys go into culinary. They usually go into operations or radio or more technical fields, you know, gunners, mates, missile guys. So there was a team that each ship has when they go to deployment, and it was a visit, boarding, search, and seizure team. We also call it a VBSS team. And we do interdictions, essentially. Coast Guard does it all around our coast. When you see them boarding, there was a very popular video of them boarding a submersible. You know, some Coast Guard dude jumps onto it, and we didn't have that happen. But you know, we would board vessels in the Gulf to enforce U.S. sanctions and things at that time after the Iraqi War. So I remember the boatswain mate, Master Chief. He come hit me up one time in the galley. He said, "Cookie, I'm gonna put you on the VBSS team." I said, "No problem, Master Chief, whatever you need." I didn't know what that was.
Yeah.
You know, and so after he left, I started asking what this part was, and so some of the guys said, "Oh, you're going to be training to go board vessels and stuff." And okay. So they sent me off to Miramar, which the Navy owned at that time, and we worked with some SEALs and some other guys. Not that we were remotely close to their caliber at all, but they imparted on us some tactics, especially as it pertains to boarding vessels and weapon handling, how to clear malfunctions, how to deal with certain situations that you would encounter on a ship, because it's all metal, you know. So there was a lot of things, information that was imparted by those guys, and so that's really what gave me the foundation for the law enforcement to go into that. Was having 2 children, a wife, and then deciding I didn't want to make the Navy a career. I wanted to be around for my kids, and you know, I wanted to get back to possibly culinary, but I needed something that an uneducated guy like myself could get into, because I had no college degree at that point. I was a tradesman, you know, and Sheriff's Department was hiring, and rest is history. I went in.
So serving as a deputy sheriff gives you a unique view of communities, people, and public safety.
Yeah.
How did that work shape how you think about protecting and supporting a community? So, with people that tend to gravitate, it's my opinion, of course, people that tend to gravitate towards law enforcement or fire or things like that, they have a love of others. They have a sense of duty to others. The protectors, so to speak. You know, in law enforcement terms, we call them sheepdogs.
because what does a sheepdog do? It protects the flock
Right.
from wolves and other bad element, And so not everybody has that, and that's fine. Not everybody's built the same, and that's what makes our country so great, is that we're all different. But those of us that do have that desire and that burn inside to do that, you almost will find yourself in some profession that is a public service if it's not law enforcement, because you have that. And I believe that all the experiences growing up, all the experiences in the Navy, and then getting into the Sheriff's Department, it all felt right, like I was where I was supposed to be, doing what I was meant to do, help others and try to protect people when I can.
Right. So let's bring things back home to Calimesa.
Yeah.
Before serving on the city council, you served almost 4 years on the planning commission. So how did that opportunity come about? Did you actively pursue it, or did you just kind of fall into your lap?
So that's another great story. So I had started following politics. I had started paying attention to things around our area, around the country. And I was at home one day complaining about something. And my wife, God love her, Shannon, she's a great woman, backbone of our family. And she heard me complaining. And she said, like every good woman should, are you going to complain about it, or are you going to do something about it? And that's the honest to God truth. And I said, well, I'll do something about it. And next thing I know, she hands me the news mirror. I think it was the news mirror, and she had circled, there was, I believe, a planning commission, and I think there was a Parks and Trails Commission spot available. And so all right. So I filled out the information, came down, submitted it, and I was just doing something. I was like, I'm doing something about it. I'm not sitting there and complaining. I'm actually taking action. Well, nothing happened for about 2 or 3 months, I think. Might have been shorter, but I just remember time going by, and I thought, oh, probably they had somebody. They probably selected somebody. And I was at work at that time. I was working for a company after I medically retired from the Sheriff's Department. I went into fire life safety. And I was working at this company as a project manager, and I get a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. And I hear, is this Eric Cundieff? Yes, it is. This is Bill Davis. I said, who? Mayor Bill Davis. I said, oh, Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry. I says, what can I do for you? He says, hey, I got your application here for Planning Commission. You have time? Yes, sir, I'll make time. Good, be at the ranch in a half hour. I said, where's the ranch? So he told me the address, And thankfully, it was fairly close to, Singleton, where my home is at.
Right.
And when I worked, I was in kind of work clothing. I had no idea, I didn't want to show up in work clothing, so I ran home real quick. And the office was in Yucaipa, so I ran home real quick, and I put on a nice button-up shirt and a nice pair of slacks. And first impressions, Bill.
I do,
and which is why you're laughing. And of course, I did not, And so I put on nice clothing, and so I showed up to his ranch and went to his office, and God bless him, he come out that office door, and he was working. He's a working man.
He is,
absolutely, and I appreciate that about him. And he came out, and he was in his working clothes, and I think he had a cigarette in his hand.
That's probably right.
And and he says, well, you didn't have to dress up for this. And I remember saying something to him about, well, sir, I didn't know, I'd rather come and be dressed in nice clothes and make a nice first impression than not, And he, we kind of laughed about it. And then we talked, just like a couple of guys. We talked for probably an hour, I think. And we talked about my background in the Sheriff's Department. We talked about my background in the Navy. We talked about my background at the company, reading plans, understanding how plans look, and as it pertains to certain construction projects, and that was it. It was just a really friendly. It was a great conversation, and I will always appreciate him for that. It was just a honest to God good conversation. And after we got done, he looked over and he says, "Well, I'm gonna select you, and I'm gonna appoint you as my planning commissioner. So be at the next meeting." And he told me what time that was, and that's how I got in.
Wow. Pretty good. That's a pretty good way to get in.
It was an awesome way to get in.
Yeah.
Because it was, I didn't know anybody. It wasn't like, a hookup or any kind of thing like that,
Right.
which sometimes happens.
Right. Absolutely.
And not that that's bad, but, he had his pick of whoever applied, and he picked me, So,
Nice.
yeah, it was really cool.
So, planning is obviously can be very complicated.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So when you first stepped into that role, what surprised you the most?
Wow. So there was so much to take in. Regulations, land use, zoning. A lot of people don't understand about zoning. I had no clue about zoning. You think that the city can do whatever it can do, whatever it wants to do with pieces of property within the city. And to a degree, that may be true, but once a plot is zoned, it's going to take a lot of work to change that, particularly if other projects have already applied for some type of construction that match the zoning. And then somebody comes along and wants to change the zoning or do something different, So,
Right.
so there can be some pitfalls in that. But that was a very big surprise to me. It was kind of taking that in, and thankfully Kelly, our planning director, she took me along basically every step of the way and helped me as much as she could, and I owe her a great debt for that.
We're very, very lucky to have her.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is there a project or moment from your planning commission years that really opened your eyes to that complexity? Is there anything in particular that did?
Absolutely. And I'm sure you already know which one I'm going to say. It's the Oak Valley Town Center.
Yeah.
And that project had been going on so many years before I got onto planning. But I was involved, our planning commission at the time was involved with some of the final approvals that we sent to council for approval. And so it felt really good to see some of that come to fruition, But understanding how long it took and all of the hurdles that had to be jumped, to get it there. And the dynamic between the builders, the money folks, and then, city, of course. And there's a lot of moving parts to these things. And that was very eye-opening, So that was one project that really surprised me, when it finally started. I was so happy. And then when it had its problems, was very discouraging.
Yeah, no, it is. And, I've talked a lot about that on the podcast. And, I think discouraging, disappointing is probably an understatement. It's frustrating.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of things that, unfortunately, we just don't have a lot of control over, right? Especially with private landowners.
Right.
So, there's more that, if it was up to us, things would be in operation, things would be built, and we'd be generating tax revenue from that to help our community. But
Yep.
it's a lot of it's out of our hands.
It is, and that's one of the things that most folks don't know until you get involved or you do the research yourself, and then you learn and you're aware of that, and until I got into planning and then the council, I didn't realize that to that detail.
Right.
And so, having the residents that see something start and then have the questions that come with that, like what happened and all these kind of things, it's sometimes disheartening, for them. I feel bad for them because I know all the good that was going to come from that now.
Right.
Like all of the great projects, the walkways, the parks, the trails, the schools, shopping, the businesses, all of that was going to be a nice boost in our arm.
Right. So in your candidate statement when you ran for city council, you talked about controlled, well-planned growth. So without getting into politics, what does well-planned growth mean to you on a practical level?
So to me, well-planned growth and controlled growth is you're not just slapping buildings up in every corner of land that your city has available. We have to be good stewards of what we've been entrusted with as council members, as city staff, because you guys will be here long before and after, some of us have come and gone on the council. But we want to be good stewards of the projects because we want them to benefit the citizens. We want them to benefit our city. And the biggest way that is in revenue and business and jobs and other things like that. And then lastly, unfortunately, is to benefit the developer. And I think the developers get that. When we talk that way, I think they can respect that and understand that. We want to make sure that what we bring and put into our city, that the citizens are going to be the prime beneficiaries of it. And I'll give you a good example of something that I would say that. too, is some of our surrounding cities, have waited a long time to maybe develop and bring in some big box stores, such as maybe a Target or, Sam's Club or something like that, Walmart. Well, subsequently, Walmart ended up in Beaumont, and now we know that Target's going to end up in Beaumont.
Right.
And both that Yucaipa and Calimesa would have benefited tremendously from having the revenue, the jobs, and just keeping the drive to a minimum, right? Because now we got to leave the city if we want to go to those places and buy things.
Yep.
And so to me, that's what that means, is looking at the different land uses that we have, maximizing what's going to be better for our citizens and our city and the developer, but getting the best bang for our buck, so to speak.
Right. That makes sense. That makes sense. So if you had to sum it up, what were one or two big lessons you took from serving on the Planning Commission that still help guide you as a council member today?
So a couple of things. You're not always going to have the right answer. Sometimes the decision you make is not going to be the most popular one with the folks that come and voice their concerns, and I welcome that. We want to hear from the public, but that's a hard thing to wrestle with sometimes, because if you have the mindset that you want to please everybody, you're not going to be able to do it, because who can please 100 people the 100% of the time? You just can't.
Right.
So you got to try and take the information that's provided, and then the desires of the rest of the folks in the community that you can get that input from, and then make decisions based on that. And then the additional part to that is be humble, because you're one of 5, and my voice is no more important than the other 4. And although I may have good ideas, or sometimes I think they're good ideas, maybe somebody else has a better idea. And be humble enough to accept that and work together to move forward for the betterment of our community.
I think that advice can apply to a lot of different situations. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I try to use that, especially in our council, we have a great council. I think we work really well together. So
we do. I agree. I'm not just saying that because you guys are my bosses either. So at some point you made the decision to run for city council.
Yeah.
What ultimately convinced you that this was the next step?
So about my 3rd year in, I think it was about the 3rd year in, I was kind of playing with the idea, and a lot of it came from our present mayor, Linda Molina. When she was on council, I remember her making a statement from the dais, something to the effect of, we'd like to see more younger people get involved in city politics. And that stuck in my brain. And not that the folks that we had were aged, to the point where they couldn't do sound work. It was just, I see what she's saying, that at some point, people are going to move on or retire or stop doing it, and we want to have younger folks with interest, and kind of make that perpetual. And so that stuck in my mind. So about the 3rd year in, after I kind of heard that, I remember talking with, at the time, our chair of the Planning Commission was Mike Barron. Mm-hmm. Who's the chair again. Phenomenal guy, knows the plans, knows, code and all kinds of stuff, is a great asset for us on planning. And I was telling him, I says, Mike, I think I'm going to run for council. And he goes, we got to make you the chair. So what do you mean? You want to be the chair? We got to put that out there and see if everybody's good with it, because that would help you. And I thought, man, that's a cool thing, He was just looking at some way to elevate or help, a fellow planning commissioner, Now, obviously, he couldn't just give it to me, but, his statement to me was he would put it forward, and then the rest of the planning commission would make the decision. And thankfully, everyone agreed, and I became the chair. So that last year, I had that, to help me. And so having that information from Linda, and then talking with Mike about it, and then realizing that we had 3 seats that were up for re-election, I thought that was probably the best opportunity for me. And again, not that those 3 were doing anything wrong, and I said that to each one of them. I wanted that job. I believed that was my next step in the progression of helping our community and being a good steward of the position, if I could be there.
Right. So before you ran, mm-hmm. I'm sure you had ideas about what serving on the council would be like. How is that reality compared to what compared to your expectations once you actually were seated on the dais?
Okay, so that is a really great question because I had said in a couple of the forums that public safety was my primary concern, and with my background in law enforcement, I want to make sure that our citizens are protected, that they have enough police officers, that we have enough firefighters, that we have enough safety mechanisms in place to help them. And that was one of the things that I wanted to see us get more of. And so I had expectations, that it would be similar to planning in the sense that information was disseminated to us. We'd have to review it, make decisions on it, talk about it. But I had misunderstandings of how positions are created, how it's funded. And it wasn't until I got on the dais and had our onboarding with you and Celeste, particularly in the finances issue of the city, that my eyes were opened, because there's a lot of things we want for the city. But the problem is, just like every household in America, especially in our beautiful little town of Calimesa, we have to live within our means.
Yep.
And if we only make X amount of dollars a month, we have groceries to pay for, we have car payment to pay for, insurance to pay for, house payment to pay for. So whatever's left over, that would be the money we would use at home for dinner or buy something nice for the kids or whatever.
Right.
Same applies to the city. We have X amount of dollars that come in, and we have to do certain, services we have to pay for and provide. And there's not necessarily a whole lot of left over at times for us to say, yeah, we can bring on a whole nother staff of deputy sheriffs or a whole nother staff of firefighters, to make it a little more safer.
Right. Yeah.
And so we do a great job understanding the budget and understanding where our firefighters are at and understanding where our law enforcement are at. We do a great job of managing, the several deputy sheriffs. And, there are times when our city has one at a time, while the shifts are being, switched or whatever they're doing, but for the most part, we're covered. We've got decent coverage, especially for the amount of crime that we have in our city. They do a great job.
Right. So. And I think, and it's contrary to what a lot of people believe, and I've talked about this on the podcast in prior episodes about property taxes and sales taxes and how it works, right?
Yeah.
And it's, a lot of people think that we can just raise taxes whenever we want, and that's what we do. But we don't,
yeah.
And we can't.
Right.
And it's just like if you want to raise at work, you have to go ask your boss. Well, in this case, our boss is the residents.
Yeah.
And if we wanted to increase our taxes, we'd have to ask the residents. So that's something that a lot of people don't understand.
You're right. And I think a good example for folks that are watching or listening is look at Yucaipa just recently passed that Measure S, where they had a similar situation where they wanted to garner more revenue for public safety. And that went to a ballot measure where people voted on it, and they did, and it passed.
Right.
We don't have the authority to just raise arbitrarily taxes on our citizenry. And thank God, because imagine if we were all just spending like, to coin my background, drunken sailors. We would just raise taxes, and then spend it on stuff that the citizens were, what are you guys doing?
Right.
And so it's a nice checks and balances.
Yeah. Well, and that was really a big reason that Prop 13 passed in the first place 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Was that very reason, because that was happening at the time. And so it reined it in. Maybe reined it in a little bit more than needed, only because we're seeing long-term consequences to that.
Right.
But nonetheless, that was a really big motivation for it. So, I get what you're saying. And so we're not just talking about political issues here, but just the process itself. What surprised you the most about running for office?
So I really had a good experience running for office. Both Mayor Davis and our current Mayor Linda Molina were both gracious and kind to me and offered help. And that really surprised me because I was running against both of them. And Wendy, she was a great councilwoman as well, and I had not connected with her as much. But that was one little surprise, that how friendly they were versus what you would see in national politics or even, other city local politics. There's a lot of mudslinging. Mm-hmm. And so the thing that surprised me was how well we all kept out of the mud. We didn't slander each other. We didn't, badmouth each other. It wasn't about that. Everything that Bill Davis did for this city, God bless him. Everything that Wendy did for this city, God bless her. Linda, God bless her. She's still here. And they did great work. I don't have complaints about that. I just wanted to do their job, and so I was very pleasantly surprised with how well everyone treated each other. The one thing that really disappointed me was how bad some of the public acted towards our signs. I guess nobody likes political signs, but that's part of the process. When people run for office, you just have to understand that every couple of years you're going to see that.
Right.
And you just be respectful. And the amount of signs that were torn down or vandalized by citizens or people that were not necessarily from our area, that really surprised me, because we are a smaller town, sleepy little town of sorts, but to have people that thought that it was their right and it was their obligation to tear down some of these signs, it was infuriating.
Yeah,
of sorts.
And it was interesting. I remember dealing with that, and it was really interesting because it wasn't any particular person targeted.
Right.
I feel like it's every candidate that had signs out there had the same issue.
Absolutely.
It was universal.
Yeah. I remember putting up, because I told Linda and I told Bill, hey, I put their signs back up. I put Wendy's signs back up because what's right is right.
Right.
And, I don't have a problem with that, but you're right. It wasn't one individual in particular. There was a person who was found out, and they were arrested. We had to have that handled, but the point was that it's not that person's right to go and tear down things that they don't like. Everyone can have opinions, and that's fine. We should have different opinions, but be respectful of other people's opinions.
Right.
Especially during election time.
Right.
Because we're all Americans. We're all human.
Yeah.
Be
Right.
kind.
Yes.
So
during the campaign, were there any conversations with residents that stuck with you or shaped how you think about your role today?
Yes. So, on the council, we're apolitical in the sense that we don't favor one or the other, whether it's left or right or independent or libertarian. We make decisions as a whole based on the city and the direction that we believe the city needs to go in, our general plan and, the like, all these kind of things.
Right.
Well, as I was knocking doors, I remember knocking on a door, and there was a young lady had answered, and I introduced myself and told her what I was doing, and the first thing out of her mouth was, "Are you Democrat or Republican?" And so I thought for a second. I said, so far no one's ever asked me that because it's been apolitical,
Right.
And so I told the lady, I says, well, I'm a registered Republican, but this position is a political position. It's not a Republican ran or a Democrat ran position. And she said, well, we're Democrats, so there's nothing I can do for you. And I thought really hard about that for a second before I responded. And I said to her, I says, well, ma'am, I appreciate your position. I says, but if you have time, I'd love to talk to you about a couple of things that are important to me for the city. And you might find that we have some of the similar views on some of these issues. Well, by this time, I assume it was her husband or fiance or boyfriend or something. He had come to the door. And so they asked me about a couple of things that were important to me. And law enforcement, obviously, is number one in my heart for the citizens. We want safety and, fire as well.
Right.
And so I kind of expounded a little bit on that. And then the roadways, infrastructure, which our city does a great job as best as it can to try and fix roadways little by little as we can throughout the city. And so we talked about some of these issues. And by the time we were done discussing this, it was like a friendly conversation. And she says, you know what? Well, we'll help you out. And I think too oftentimes people get stuck in what they believe their identity is with whatever political party that may be and forget that they're human. Again, going back to that idea that we're all American, we're all in this country.
Right.
We can work through things. My wife and I have been married for going on 28 years. We don't agree on a lot of stuff, but we've made it work for 28 years, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, people that have different political parties, they just need to talk, and that's how my wife and I get through it, right? We talk about things and we work it out. The same way we can with people that have different political viewpoints or different, standings.
Right.
Sometimes we'll agree and sometimes we'll disagree. That doesn't mean they're less of a person. It just means that we have different places that we're coming from.
Right.
You know.
That makes sense. So you've now served in both an appointed role on the Planning Commission and an elected role on the City Council. How different did it feel moving from one seat to the other?
So I think it took probably a couple of months maybe for it to really hit. On the Planning Commission, you know, I remember getting into Planning Commission, the same feeling, you know, it was like fish out of water kind of thing, you know, it was new. And then you get comfortable. And when I got to council, you know, I'm the new guy. And so it was new, and it took me at least, I would say, probably a month and a half, 2 months, where I started to feel somewhat comfortable enough, you know. Not that I wouldn't voice a concern if I had one on an agenda item, but just to feel like, okay, I'm comfortable in my skin sitting where I'm at, realizing that we're handling serious business for the city.
Mm-hmm.
Planning Commission is serious, but that gets sent up to the City Council, you know, and then we approve it or not, depending, you know. And so all of the different agenda items, the consent items, all of the things that we deal with, they have a lot of impact, you know. And so it took me a little while to really kind of realize that, you know, the importance of these decisions, that, you know, they're not going to just affect me, it's affecting our city.
Right.
You know, and so I try not to think of that too much, because you know, you can let that weight crush you.
Right.
You know, but I try to go back to what we talked about earlier. Is it good for the city? Is it good for the, you know, citizens, the city, and then the developer? You know, these kind of things. And if I can keep that and try to stay as humble as possible with that, and not let my pride get in the way, because oftentimes pride is a killer. You know, this is not a place for pride.
Right.
You know? So, yeah.
So from a high level and non-political standpoint, what are some of the themes or priorities that guide your decision-making on the council? You know, things like public safety, quality of life, or preserving our character, those general values.
So for me, I always want to be able to look myself in the mirror when I get home and know that I stayed true to who I am, that I tried to do the best for our community, our city, and then, you know, how's it going to leave the city for the future? And if I can do that, then I think I've done it right, you know. And the decision may not be popular, but that's okay. If I can look at myself in the mirror and realize that I did the best, and I know that this is going to be good for us, and maybe some people don't see it, but after it's done, they may see it then.
Yeah.
That makes me happy. I'm okay with that. I can live with that. A good example would be, you know, some development topics. You know, not getting into too much of that, but, you know,
Yep.
Sometimes there's things that the citizens don't realize. You know, that the revenue that's going to be generated by some of these projects, if we don't have that, at some point we're going to have to pull back on some of the services that we provide.
Right.
Because if we don't have it, what are you going to do? You know, you can't print money, you know, out of there.
Right.
We got to figure out how we're going to do this, you know. And so either something gets cut and then you move money somewhere else, if you can do that. But yeah, it's an interesting position to be in.
Yeah. You know, it is. You're right. You're right. You've mentioned public safety and well-planned growth as two things you really care about.
Yeah.
How do you see those two ideas working together as Calimesa continues to grow?
So I hope, you know, in the next several months and year that we'll have some additional development finally get through, and some of these issues with Oak Valley and all that stuff get rectified, where we'll have some of that revenue come in. And ideally, what I'd like to see is, which wasn't really my vision first, it was your guys' vision, to have a secondary station somewhere in the city. Mm-hmm. And why is that important? Is because the response times, you know, although our guys are working hard and they're doing well with what they've got, a couple, 3 minutes could mean a lifetime to somebody who's having a critical incident.
Right.
And so being able to provide that extra level of security to our citizens has been, I think, since I came on, a priority that you and I have talked about, many times.
Right.
Trying to figure how we can do that. And then the law enforcement aspect of it is I want our citizens to be safe. I want them to feel comfortable. I want them to be able to know that when they come down, when we have those food vendors or we have a market night or something along those lines, that they're not going to have to worry about a criminal element coming in and victimizing them.
Right.
And so to me, just in the heart of the servant, heart of being, a public servant of sorts, those are the things that I always gravitate towards first.
Right. What's something you've learned about how city staff and the council work together that you think most residents don't see from the outside?
That's a good question. So I think, I'll tell you this. I had this impression that, the city council could just, make a phone call and make something happen at the snap of their finger, And although that may seem to be true in some larger cities, or some other organizations, I don't think it's meant to be that way. Learning what I've learned through going through the different seminars and working with you guys and the rest of the council and talking with other counterparts in other cities, what I appreciate from it, and I hope the citizens at home can appreciate from it, is that the staff, the city manager, runs essentially the city. We are the policy drivers. The city council directs as far as policy goes, and what our vision is as far as growth, as far as build out, as far as the strategic plan, these kind of things. And then you guys implement that. And so I think sometimes, and I was guilty of it, citizens think, I can call the councilman or I'll email a councilman and then they can make it happen. That doesn't always work that way. It might be some way to do that on maybe some smaller issue, but when we've got direction already on print, where we're all in agreement to, I think it puts the city manager and our staff in a precarious position if a council person thinks they have the right to call up and override what the rest of us has agreed to.
Right.
And I think that some of the citizens may not understand that, and sometimes councilmen don't understand that. I think when you get a newer councilman or somebody who's got their egos too big for their head, kind of a thing, that can be problematic. But thankfully I don't see that with us.
Yeah, and I see that more. It's more pronounced in cities that do have councils that don't get along.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you have like a 3-2 council, sometimes those that are in the minority, so to speak, may try to do that and go to staff directly to override the decisions because they didn't like what was decided.
Yeah, and so that the public knows, what that does now is it pits the city manager or the staff against the other council members. Mm-hmm. So now, next election cycle, if those that were telling the city manager what to do and he was going along or she was going along with it, and then new folks come in, first thing I would be thinking about is my job on the line now?
Right.
All the good stuff that I've done doesn't matter now because I've got some new bosses that may decide they want to go in a different direction.
And I've seen that happen. I've seen city managers come in and those that are on the minority side start trying to push policy through backdoor channels, and city managers actually kowtowing to that, and they get in trouble quickly. Yeah, because I have to follow what the majority says.
Absolutely.
So yeah. No, it's absolutely an issue. Luckily, right now we don't have that.
Yeah,
we haven't had it here in a while. So we're very, we've got a great council, great staff right now, and so we're in a very good spot.
Our staff is fantastic.
Yeah,
there's so many. I mean, I could talk for an hour about how great they're just fantastic.
Yeah,
I love them all.
Yeah. What has been the most surprising part of serving on the city council? Whether it's time commitment, complexity of issues, expectations from the community, things like that?
I think one of the most surprising things has been the amount of folks that have reached out to me. By folks, I mean developers, real estate type folks, that are, I think, wanting to pick your brain because for so long, and I don't mean to indict the last council, but for so long, Calimesa and Yucaipa, for that matter, have been kind of a smaller growth, cities, just have. And so I think, it's my opinion, there might be some truth to it, but I think that when an election happens and there's new blood now on the council, I think that these folks that are developers and real estate folks and all these kind of guys, they they start putting their feelers out. And so I was really surprised at how many have reached out, and want to meet. And so my position on that is I'll meet with anybody. Anybody wants to talk to me, if I can make time for them, I will, because I was elected to care for our city, you know. And so it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to agree with them or support their plan or their idea, but I'll listen to them. And if it comes before us, then I'll make the best decision I can based on the guidelines that I've shared earlier.
Right. And is there a moment from your time on council so far, big or small, that you're especially proud of?
There is, actually, and you kind of alluded to it earlier at the beginning of your podcast here, this podcast. So I'm going to save that one. I got two. The first one is going to be, I felt really proud and happy when we had a say in creating a full-time public works director's position. That made me so happy because the person that we have, Mari Shakir, man, she's fantastic.
She is.
And she gives a lot of herself to the city. A lot of the people may not know that, and all of our staff does. But I couldn't think of a better person to have full-time, And you and I had kind of talked about that too early on, like, hey, have we tried to poach her, from this company? And when you brought that to us for us to approve, for that full-time position, that made me happy. Because we were saving money, and we're getting the best person that I felt, for the position.
Yeah, it was seamless. It
was good.
Great. We got lucky on that one, I think, a little bit, because the right person at the right time.
Yeah.
And luckily, we courted her and she said yes.
Yeah, I'm still happy about it. I mean, she's a good asset to have in the city. And the second one, which you kind of alluded to earlier, was. You and I had talked, I think it was right around the time that the lease was running up on the B of A building. And I'd like to say it was my idea, but I'd be lying. It wasn't, because you had talked with Darlene, about options. And the Bank of America building is being a possible option for our new city hall. And I came to you guys had already had that idea, and I came to you because the lease was coming up for the library that we were using. I said, remember, hey, Will, what are we doing about this? Is there any way for us to? And you jumped on it. You brought it to the rest of us council members, and of course there's some I can say and some I can't, obviously, because of closed session stuff. But it pleases me to. I can announce it, right? I can say it.
Well, I mean, it'll be the agenda's out, so yes.
Okay. Well, it pleases me to announce that we've acquired the Bank of America building on Calimesa Boulevard, and that will be our future home of our city hall.
Pending the final approval of you and your colleagues. So that will happen this Monday.
That will happen this Monday. I anticipate that'll be a unanimous effort.
I think so too.
Yeah.
But yeah, we still make it official, and because we do it the right way.
Yeah.
Right? We have to
Absolutely.
approve the final agreement in public. Nothing's a done deal until it's approved in public.
Yeah, and that's thank you for bringing that up, because there's been we've had some accusations recently that we were doing some stuff behind everything we do is above board. And I'll stand up before any magistrate and any attorney and answer that and be proud of that answer, because I know that to be true.
Yep.
But I think what I want to tell the public about that acquisition is the city hall that we currently have, we've outgrown it.
Right.
We don't have room, even if we had the funding to hire another person, like let's say a human resources officer, for instance, or something. Where are we going to put them?
Right.
And we've outgrown it. And this just happens to be a place that will accommodate all of what we have and allow for growth. And it's a good structured building. You guys have gone over that with a fine-tooth comb, and the cost to the city is going to be a fraction of what it would be if we built something brand new from scratch.
Right.
So that's another great thing that we're saving some money on.
Yeah, so I'm excited for our meeting on Monday, just for that very reason.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
I'm happy.
Yeah. So is there anything you'd like residents to know about your approach to serving on council that we haven't talked about yet? No, nothing other than I'm approachable. If folks have question and I can answer it, I will do that. If I don't have the answer, I'm not going to lie to you and give you some other, story. Let me get back to you on that, and I'll go find the answer and then let them know that. The one thing that I would ask or encourage our citizens to do is
be careful about the information that you get on social media. Be careful about the information that you hear from other people, because it's not always true. There might be a fraction of it that's accurate, but the rest of it is off, tremendously off. And another case in point would be, the Oak Valley Town Center project. I was just talking to a couple of friends the other day in Yucaipa, and they said, yeah, that place stopped because there was a dinosaur they found, some giant, T-Rex bones and all. I said, where do you get this information, man? I says, that's not it, And so I would caution the citizens to be careful about what you see and hear and read on social media. It's not always accurate. Call the city. You can always call the city and get a hold of somebody here, or send an email to us, and we'll get an answer for you, as best we can.
Right. And that's exactly why I do this podcast.
Yeah.
Is to get the right information out there. And by the way, on the town center, they found some prehistoric bones from some animal out there.
Right.
It stopped the project for a couple of hours.
Yeah, it wasn't a dinosaur.
It wasn't the whole project.
No, it
was not a dinosaur.
Yeah, it wasn't a dinosaur. Like they were saying, oh yeah, they found this giant dinosaur, and they're excavating it. I'm like, no, dude, that's not what's happening.
No. And even if they did, okay, it stops the project for they dig it up,
Right.
and then you continue. I mean, that's how it works.
Yeah.
You don't stop it for as long as it stopped.
Right.
And I have covered that on the podcast too. So anyway.
Yeah.
So you've lived in Calimesa with your wife and two kids since 2016.
Yeah.
How has your family either influenced or how they influence or how they support your campaign?
So I've been blessed. God's blessed me incredibly with this woman that I have. She's been with me, like I said, almost 28 years now, almost 27 years. And she was the one that initially pushed me to react, to do something. And before I decided to run full on 100% do it, I had to have that conversation with her. And she was supportive, very supportive. And, she went and knocked doors for me. She went and handed out flyers for me. I mean, she was very supportive, still is supportive. My daughter, she was my quasi-campaign manager of sorts, because I didn't really have a campaign manager. I had her and another friend of ours, Emily. They were kind of tag teaming it, but just the fact that they were involved, my daughter was involved, and she designed my signs for me, and just did a lot of great things. She accompanied me to came to the event that we had for Ken Calvert.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember meeting her there. Yes.
Uh-huh. And she's a good egg. She's a good egg, that girl. And she's my roll dog, man. She's my little roll dog. Now my son, he's a couple years younger, but he's 24 now. But he helped me as well. He helped me the day that we could put up our signs. Man, we were up that morning, and that was amazing because I didn't think he would do it. But he got up early, and we went out and he put signs in with me, and then we had to take him down. He came out and helped me, and so yeah, they were all supportive, every one of them.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
That's
it was.
Cool.
It was a family affair of sorts.
Nice. So when you're not doing city business, and I think I might know at least one of or a couple of the answers here. What are some of the things you enjoy to unwind or recharge?
Man, so unwind. Nothing makes me happier and more at peace than having a nice cigar and a glass of bourbon. I love it. It's just relaxing to me. I sit on my back porch and can turn on a little music, and that is probably some of the nights when we have a long session, or maybe there's some things going on that are just kind of cluttering your mind a little bit. It's just nice to be able to disconnect and have that. I love watching ice hockey, as you know.
Yep.
The Go Kings Go.
That's right.
Love going to hockey games. My daughter and I go to a lot of concerts, music shows together, and those are things that just kind of help keep me grounded, and realize that family and friends is precious to have around you and enjoy it.
Right. So finally, for someone young in Calimesa today who might be interested in serving in either the military or law enforcement, or running for city council or serving on a commission, what advice would you give them?
So for young folks that are thinking about a career or just getting into the military to contribute to, supporting our nation, I would say absolutely 100% do it. I don't regret doing it. College isn't for everybody, but you can go to college, you can go to the military too. You can do both. But go into it with the understanding that you're one part of a giant machine, and that you are needed and it's necessary for you to conform to that machine in order to make it work. And so there's not a lot of room for pride. There's not a lot of room for it's about me. It has to be about the benefit of others. Mm-hmm. If you can have that mindset and you can humble yourself enough to do that, then you're going to be effective and you'll be a good member or even a leader at some point. When it comes to law enforcement, if you have that sheepdog mentality that we talked about earlier, the ability to want to help and stop bad things from happening to good people, mm-hmm. then absolutely. Keep your background clean, keep your nose clean, work hard, and follow your passion with that. Politics are a little different in the sense that it's not just necessarily about you reacting to something as if it was in law enforcement or the military, because you have an objective in the military and you work together to accomplish that. In law enforcement, you go to a call for service, whatever that may be, and then you either handle it on your own, or you have partners but you're all working together for the same thing. In politics, sometimes people have different agendas, and sometimes, not so much at our level, at the city, but sometimes it's a little frustrating.
Right.
And so you have to be patient, and you have to be a team player. You have to be of the mindset that you're not going to always get everything that you want or that you think the city needs, or whatever position in politics you find yourself in. But try to be the best person that you can be to make choices that are going to help people and do the best for them,
Right.
And if it's not about that, then what are you doing? If people get into it for money and notoriety, then they've missed the boat.
Right.
Completely missed the boat.
Yeah. Well, Councilmember Cundieff, thank you so much for joining us on the
thank you,
podcast
sir.
today, and for sharing your story. We appreciate it. To our listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Calimesa Insider podcast. Just a reminder to stop by our City Council meeting this Monday, December 1st at 6 p.m. right here at the Norton Young Love Senior Center to celebrate our city's 35th birthday. If you can't make it in person, you can watch at calimesa.gov/YouTube. To see the full meeting agenda, visit calimesa.gov/agenda center. We hope you can join us for the Christmas Market and Christmas Parade on Saturday, December 6th on Calimesa Boulevard. Also, be on the lookout for details on our Cherry Valley Boulevard Interchange Town Hall. Please follow and subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. All links can be found at calimesa.gov/podcast. If you have ideas for future topics, questions about how your city works, or suggestions for future guests, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach out via direct message on Instagram or send an email to calimesainsider@gmail.com. Take care, have a great Thanksgiving, and I'll talk to you again in a couple of weeks.